I was telling someone earlier that we all have different definitions of what the Midwest is. It could be Iowa, it could be Ohio, it could be Chicago, out to Denver. Everybody has a different thought. Some people say it's from the right side to the left side of Kansas. So from our standpoint, we define it as the middle of the country, and we want to be the premier landscape architecture firm that people look to in the middle of the country. And we think we're well on our way to do that, and certainly projects like this are helping us sort of achieve that goal over time. We were founded in 1998 in Des Moines by three landscape architects that thought they could do things in a different way. With that charge, we have empowered each of our office leaders to look at their markets and look at their design in those markets in a different way. And that's what I think has appealed to the group here from day one in our proposal, and then when we came down to meet with them and talk about who we are. We really approach it from a different perspective, and I'm going to share some of that with you. Specifically on this team, it's myself, principal with the firm. Chris Klein is another principal in our Kansas City office. He's not here today. Patricia mentioned Jackie Kolpeck. You have to stand up now and wave. Jackie's one of our young, talented designers that we've been excited to really see her really flourish in this project. Brian Clark is our president, the original founder of the company. When we started, we were actually called Brian Clark and Associates. But in 2008, we realized we were bigger than that name, and so we've sort of developed that philosophy around the idea of confluence and bringing ideas together. And then Matt Evett is another landscape architect in our Kansas City office who's been serving as our project manager from the beginning and will be carrying this out with Simpson Construction to the very end. So, who is Confluence? Just a little bit about us. Patricia asked me to share that just so you all knew who's been working with the committee on this. We design big outdoor spaces. As we tell people, don't think backyards and bushes. Although we do that, that's not our core business. Our core business really is working for cities, municipalities, universities that have spaces they're trying to transform. And that's what we feel we are, as transformation designers. We design the outside that's inside cities. So think of your wonderful civic spaces in Wichita and in other places you've lived or visited. That's what we do, and that's what we're passionate about, is really creating those places that bring people together and really kind of build memories, build that experience that you have when you go someplace. And I think what does separate us from a lot of our competition is that our plans really include you. They include our clients. We're very passionate about engaged conversation in the design process. I'm going to talk more about that when I get into the process we went through with this committee. But when we first heard about this project, when we first talked to Jeff, it was clear to us, and it was made very clear, that the committee was looking for a consultant that would engage them in a conversation and would come with open ears and open eyes and talk to them and learn about what this project wanted to be. When we saw that, we thought, this is a client that we can really embrace, and a project we can embrace, because that is the way we approach projects. That's what's important to us, is making the projects of the client. We firmly believe that nothing great is accomplished alone. Our name speaks to that. It's not just a name. We live it every day, whether it's within our individual offices, whether it's getting our individual offices together to create one large firm, or whether it's bringing everyone around the table together with their ideas, the clients, the contractors, the designers, the municipal leaders. We are very focused on facilitating that open and honest dialogue with our design process, and I think that is what leads to the successful projects that we're here to share tonight. So a little bit about the rest of our team that we've been collaborating with. Vicki Scurry, Patricia mentioned. Some of you may be familiar with her. She's done work like you see on that slide there here in Wichita. She's been involved with a number of infrastructure projects, some highway enhancement type projects. She's done some of that work in Wichita as well. It was important for the committee and for us to have someone like Vicki involved, because even though we're creative, we're designers, we're landscape architects, we are smart enough to know that we're not artists in the true meaning of the word. Having her on our team helped us think about this project in a more artful way than maybe we would have otherwise. And by that I mean thinking about gestures in the landscape in a different way, thinking about how you how you create a space that can really allow you to enjoy a sculpture or a work of art and not be distracted by other things. She was our eyes to that throughout the master planning and the early design process. And then Derek Porter, we were thrilled to bring him on and to have him say yes when we invited him. Derek was a trained artist at the Kansas City Art Institute and has developed over the years a real passion and strength in lighting design. He's completed lighting design projects all over the country. He's currently on faculty at the Parsons School of Design in New York City. So to have him be able to take the time to come back and meet with us when he's in Kansas City at his studio in Kansas City and really focus some attention on this project we thought was wonderful, because when you start looking at the lighting of a project like this, it needs to be done in a very artful way as well. And that's something that we're excited to see come to fruition. I know he's met with Patricia. They had a wonderful conversation about some of his ideas that really go beyond simply lighting a project. In addition to Derek and Vicki, the rest of our team to round out, PEC, civil engineers here locally, is providing engineering support on the project. And then there's another firm from Kansas City called Lightworks, who's a lighting and electrical engineering firm that's helping to support Derek. And then obviously Jeff and his team providing the oversight and coordination with the client. And then we're looking forward to, as we're beginning this transition process with Simpson, to hand the reins over to them and really let them take the lead. And that has already started to be a good collaboration. So to go into the actual process a little bit, I want to talk about this as a collaboration, because that's really what it's been. This is the committee. This is the group that has done a tremendous amount of work over the last 8 months. And if you've been involved with a project that has become a $3 million project, you understand that doing what we've done in 8 months is aggressive, unusual, and takes a lot of commitment. And getting these folks together to meet on a regular basis, as you can expect, is not easy. That's usually the toughest part of a collaborative process. But with Patricia's assistance and the commitment of the committee members, we were able to stick to a pretty aggressive schedule, and we were able to make important decisions in a timely fashion because those people felt like this project was important. Even getting Elizabeth on the phone from Canada. I mean, she wanted to be there. She wanted to be involved in the process, and that is what has made this so successful and will make it successful for the long term. So what did we do? In this process, we started out with a lot of listening. We asked questions. We had them tell us things that they felt were important to them about the museum, about Wichita, about the space that's currently outside the museum, because words are important in what we do. Those words help to guide our design process and our design decisions moving forward. When we approached this, we didn't come with any preconceived ideas of what this garden could become. We really had no thoughts in our mind of what it might look like. We didn't know what was going to be important. They had shared with us a brainstorm list of things, so we sort of knew what might, come up. But we really didn't know what was going to stick out of that list. So we went through a series of these exercises just talking about what was important, what are the good things, what are the bad things in the space. What do they see the vision of this art garden in the future being? Put yourself 2 years down the road or a year down the road when we have the ribbon cutting. What's going to be the headline in the Eagle? Is it going to be a good headline? What is the strength of that headline going to be? Because we can take that back as designers, and that personifies this space for us. It helps us understand where people's heads are and what's important. Unfortunately, one of our designers said, Obama says eighth wonder of the world, and I reminded him we're in Wichita, and that's probably not the best name to say. So we changed that one to the president says the eighth wonder of the world. So we had a lot of fun along the way too, and I'm enjoying listening to all the laughter in the room tonight. This is obviously a fun group, and I think there's a reason we hit it off so well. So one of the questions we asked was, what do you think about it today? And we put all those words on the board, and I don't think anybody would question many of these. But I mean, we need to understand what is there today. What is the baseline we're starting from? Because this helps us know what people want to change. And then we said, what do you want it to be in the future? a destination. These are important to us. As I said, they help us understand the personality that people want this space to be. Patricia mentioned this being for the city, for the community. It was important that this really serve as a living room to Wichita, as a way to engage more people in the culture and the art. And while we're doing that sometimes in very direct ways, we also are looking for ways to do that indirectly, so that kids can wander through and not realizing that they're being exposed to some wonderful art. They just think they're going to a fun place to climb on walls and roll in the grass. So we're always mindful of those indirect ways to engage the community. So this is what it looks like today from the sky. The river on the right, the north is up on that screen. The red dots represent things that people were ready to see gone and changed. There just happen to be a few more of those than the green dots. The green dots mean go, let's keep it, let's do what we can with it, let's polish it off. Yeah, there were a lot of red around those bollards out front. And Elizabeth, I think you get all of them, right? I think she's got a plan for them, and I won't go into what it is. But what we took from this really is pretty simple. This view, this connectivity to the river is incredibly important. The name Riverview Art Garden is no accident. So embracing the river, engaging with the river in some fashion was a priority for the group. There's a few green dots, but really when we started to talk about it, what that told us was it was important that there still be a place to have events. What that looked like we didn't know at the time, but it was important that space be there. There was much conversation about the Dreamers Awake sculpture, but it was important that be addressed in a thoughtful way that enhanced that space, made it more of a welcoming front door to the community. While it really doesn't show up on this, one of the things that came out of the conversation and really came out of our first visit here was the lack of clarity as to where the entrance is to the museum. Oh, so even if you live here, you don't know. So there are a couple of red dots on that sign that's over here that really confuses people. So that's part of what we were trying to address in some of our design moves was try to get people to understand this is the front. This is the important front entrance to the museum. But at the same time, we know there's animosity, but we also know there's opportunity with this sculpture. And so can we make it more of an asset and try to tone down some of that concern that people have? So we've spent a lot of time. We had some great conversations with the sculptor, Tom Otterness. He's really been good to work with and really has helped sort of free some of the handcuffs we thought we had on what we could do around that space. Having meetings with him, it helped us really have more flexibility to get in and around that sculpture to introduce new things that he's excited about because it allows people to experience the sculpture in a different way, and that we're excited about because it allows us to really complete that space and not let it be so stark as it is today. So from that, we went through a series of conceptual sketch studies. We broke the group up into 3 teams the first day that we had them. We walked the site together in those teams, and then we came back and we spent time drawing. I mentioned the committee worked. We put pens in the committee's paper, or in the committee's hands. We made them put lines on paper. We made them talk about those lines so they understood what the importance of putting a line on paper is in ultimate decision making for a design. Because when I said earlier, we didn't come with preconceived notions, we had none. It was really our opportunity to listen in graphic form to what the committee wanted. We often say that we're simply the scribes. It's your design. We just want to hear it, and we'll help you transition or transform that thought into a graphic form or a physical form. So we had a number of sketches. Each of the teams came up with some sketch. Now they're all different. I'm not going to talk about every one. But what you will see that was common, and we didn't cheat, we didn't listen, we didn't look at what the other team, well, Jeff looked at what our team was doing. But other than that, we didn't look at what the other teams were doing. But you'll see some commonalities. You'll see these important things we talked about. This sort of gesture of movement shows up in all of them. This visibility, that connection to the river. Those were the first sketches that were done for the project. And you see that popping up in all 3 of these concepts. And we weren't comparing notes. But when we put them all up on the wall, or we walked around the room, actually, we left them on tables. When we walked around the room, we were laughing, but it was actually pretty comforting and impressive all at the same time to know that we had had enough conversations throughout the day that people were having similar thoughts. So we brought the different opinions and different ideas together pretty quickly, and it has made for, I think, a pretty smooth process throughout. So from that, we went back to our office in Kansas City with Vicki, with Derek, with our design team, and sat down and said, what do we do with this information? We have a lot of words that are important to them. We have these 3 concept sketches that we developed with them. We know what they don't like. We know what they do want in the future. We also had them tell us, we put a lot of pictures on the wall just to have them tell us what pictures resonate with them and what they don't want to see in the new garden. So we had a lot of that information. And then we also brought our own inspiration to this. What were the things that we saw in the area? The river, obviously, without a doubt. The view of the downtown area. One of the things we wanted to make sure we didn't lose sight of was the relationship of the museum to the broader cultural district downtown, the art walk, and that broader puzzle and what piece or what role this piece played in it, and how we can continue to reinforce that connection, because we are trying to make this a piece of a broader urban fabric. The walls, they're just beautiful walls that are out there along the boulevard of the museums today. Those are something that we wanted to grab and really take advantage of. And then the landscape of the area, the plains, the prairie, those types of things that, how can we tell that story, throughout the garden as well, to give it that sense of place and authenticity. The river, I mentioned that. There's different ways you can look at that. There's the connectivity to it visually. There's, walking along it in a trail. We pulled back and we said, okay, what's this river really look like? So we kind of got up at a higher altitude and looked at the Ark River and the Little Ark River and how do they come together. And then we started to abstract that into a different form that we could begin to play off of. And it can become very graceful, very serpentine, and become a nice shape and form in the landscape. And so that became really an underlying philosophy or approach to how we developed a lot of the spaces and the walks, and you'll see that when we go through the master plan. There's just that sense of intertwining and weaving that occurs in the alluvial islands that occur in the river and when it's low, like it usually is. But you see that in rivers all over, but you really see it in Kansas because we've been in this drought for so long. But that we thought was worth keeping an eye on. And then, Patricia mentioned the Nasher and some of the other wonderful museums that are out there. I mentioned we put some pictures up on the wall for the people to tell us about, what did they like, what resonated with them. So there were a few of those that really stuck out to us, and then we added some of our own afterward. But, the Nasher was one of those places that had this wonderful place to sit and just, take in a movie or take in a concert or just hang out during the day and be by yourself. So that was something that really spoke to people, and it spoke to us as well, as this sort of informal gathering space, but it can also be a more formal opportunity as well. So what can we do with that? If you've been to the Nelson, these wonderful zipper pathways that connect through the Henry Moore Sculpture Garden, everybody that in our office that's seen that really loves those. The folks here, had a similar feel for those. So we wanted to see what we could do with having these informal walkways throughout the garden as well. Again, more outdoor spaces for sitting and engaging with each other and engaging with the art. What can we do with the landscape to actually create space and not just have it be flat and barren like it is today? And then we can also use the landform sculpturally. Flat, that was a big word on there. So one of our priorities was to try to fix that and introduce some sculptural landform without being too distracting, maybe not to this extreme, but do some things that are more sculptural in the landform that really create space, but also create a different experience when you're in the space. And then the high line for a couple of reasons. One, the interrelationship of the landscape to the urbanscape, and how we can do that in a sensitive way and an artful way, but also the lighting of this is just so beautiful. And that's something that Derek has really brought to this is, if you think about this, this could have been lit in many different ways. But the worst thing that could have happened is they could have gone in there and put up a bunch of light poles. And so all you see are a bunch of dots dancing down that line. But to have the space lit in a very subtle way, but to feel safe walking there at night and just have it really enhance the ambiance and not distract you, we think is going to be an important opportunity with this garden as well. And then the sweeping landscapes of the Lurie Garden in Chicago. And what can we do in the landscape here with indigenous native materials, hardy materials that will withstand the Kansas winds and the Kansas landscape. And we have irrigation, but at the same time that doesn't give us free rein to just plant any exotic we want. We still have to be mindful of that. But there's a lot of things we can do with these color sweeps, and that's what we're really excited to see happen with this project. It will totally transform the space around the museum. And then again, some of these urban forms of the hardscape, the types of pavement patterning, the introduction of these limestone pieces as bench, so they're utilitarian as well as aesthetic, so that we're trying to do these things in double duty fashion whenever we can. And again, that interaction with a more naturalized type of landscape and how that transitions over to a lawn space. And then just the opportunity for people to be, to hang out in Bryant Park, to be able to move your chair wherever you want, to bring your own seat, to come out for a concert, to come out for some other event, and just hang out in the space. So it was important that we not over-design, and that's as much of a challenge as any sometimes. So with that, we developed, as Patricia mentioned, what started out as a $1 million design exercise really evolved into a much bigger and better master plan that all in becomes this much larger project. As Jeff reminded us multiple times, our project was the east side of the building, and as the committee kept saying, yeah, but we want to do the west side of the building too. So, and that may be our fault. We didn't tell them they couldn't. We just followed them where they told us to go, really. So it really was, along the way, continually checking, okay, are you sure? Are you sure? And there was never a question. Yes, we want to do this. We'll do as much as we can today. When we presented to the board, it was amazing. The first thing I heard was, we got to figure out how to do this all right now. They were just that excited about it. So that's one of those things that you don't find in every project and every client. So this is what it looks like today, and then the transformation is more like this, where, and I'll go into these spaces a little more, where we really have developed a master plan that transforms from the curb in on all sides, including even on the other side of the drive around the museum today. So starting at the north end, and I'm going to work around kind of in a clockwise fashion. So if you're familiar with that round mechanical enclosure that's out there today, and this actually is going to be a new drop-off or new drive that'll connect to the parking lot, so that when people still get lost up on Pine, they can find their way in and they don't have to turn around in the street. And it can also, even more importantly, serve as a drop-off for events like Tunes and Tallgrass. So you can bring people in, drop off, and then go straight into the event, or if you just want to be dropped off or picked up from a day in the sculpture garden. So it serves that as well, and it still allows all the functionality of the service area like it does today. One of the most exciting parts of this space, though, is this north garden space. And we've got some other images that you'll be able to see this better. But this is, again, one of those things we never really envisioned, but just kind of became as a part of this project. And it's a series almost like a maze garden, but it becomes this real intimate space. And if you've been out in that lawn today, there is nothing intimate anywhere in this space. So providing some overhead canopy with trees, the big green circles, and providing some sidewalks and some smaller landscaped areas, places to put the smaller pieces that maybe you have in the collection or future pieces, and provide that respite for the people who don't want to spend the day in the sun. They can come over here and have lunch in the shade. And that is really that first indication, or that your first impression of the new garden when you get dropped off, or when you come from the parking lot, you come adjacent to or through this space. And then when you exit that space, it opens up onto this wonderful amphitheater space. It's just really repurposing the lawn that's there today, taking advantage of the existing patio and stage area, expanding that a little more, but providing a little bit more formal seating, so some stone seating that helps to define that, and it's sculptural at the same time that it's functional. So this becomes a sloped amphitheater that you're actually higher out here than you are, so now you can look down into that space as opposed to looking up at it like you do today. And all the while being mindful of making sure we don't have more drainage problems like they just fixed. So there's that space. And then there's this main spine that runs through, and you'll see this walk. So keep an eye on these walks and think back to that diagram I had of the river earlier, and you begin to see that sort of interweaving of lines that landed in the landscape. And then this northeast corner, it changes. It gets a sign. It announces the museum for people that are heading south on Stackman. And it also creates a small opportunity here for a garden where sculpture could be placed. But then this new yucca garden is proposed, and it'll be installed here that's probably a little bit more akin to some of the landscape in the area because it's a more of an arid type of planting scheme through there, but a unique space to place a sculpture and to experience the garden in a different way. There are, and you'll see this in some of the other renderings, these two dark lines indicate this is something that Vicky Scurry's really going to take control of soon and lead. Or actually, there are three of them. They kind of go along this edge. One of the things that we learned early on is that you've got the apartments right across the street. That they aren't bad, but you do look right out into a parking lot. So what can we do to sort of buffer that view a little bit and enclose this edge of the garden? So there's a series of Corten, which is the weathering steel, the stuff that looks rusted all the time. Corten steel partitions that are going to be designed that have an artistic motif on them that will be semi-transparent, but they'll be set in the landscape there to help enclose that edge of the garden and not provide a total blockage and screen, but at least buffer your views so you're not quite so distracted by those apartments across the street. Then we move south into what's been called the Riverview Garden, or the Riverview Room, because it does do that. It gives you that open view out to the river. It's elevated in grade above what it is today, so you're really setting up on a pedestal and have that clear view out over the road into the river. And it was one of those things where I said to try not to over-design. That was one of those spaces where we had to work diligently not to put stuff in. We really worked hard to maintain that. And so here is that big open green where if you've got a large event and this amphitheater's full, hey, we can spill out into this space and still hear the music. You don't necessarily have to see it. You just want to be there for the event. And then this opportunity really for the garden to come out and embrace the road and embrace the public sidewalk as an indirect entrance and a welcoming opportunity for the general public that might be coming by on the trail, or maybe they start running on this side of the road now and come through the garden. So another way to engage people in the garden. Then moving on down to the Dreamers Awake Plaza, and again, we're coming down, you see these serpentine lines that create this major pathway, but then it changes a little bit, and it gets more of a garden-like feeling to it, and it provides you with an opportunity to walk up and look out over this plaza. You're at an elevated point here, looking out over that, and you're all familiar, there's a circular form around that sculpture today. That was one of the site-specific elements that Tom prescribed and was written into the original design and we had to work with. But what was not there was a tree right next to the sculpture. And these dark brown things are some more of those stone benches that are popping up out of the plaza. Those were the things that he brought to us and said, let's put some of these in. I'd love for people to have some shade out there so they can actually sit and look at this and enjoy the sculpture and not just go by it so quickly because it's hot and cold, or hot and empty. So we've really had an opportunity to embrace that more so and create a series of tiered seats so that someday we would like to see that this doorway on the first floor could actually be used as a way for people, for kids to come out of the children's area and have programmed opportunities in this plaza and then go back in. So we see that being an outdoor activity and learning area as well. And then moving on to the south end of the garden, and that zipper path that I showed you from the Nelson, trying to integrate a less formal walk. It's a way you can go if you want. One of the things that came out early was this opportunity for people to have multiple experiences in the garden. So you'll see a lot of these duplicate pathways, that people can go this way on the paved path, or they can choose an alternative route and come this direction. And this area now is mounded up. So you'll see these in a minute, but if you come this route, you're climbing up a small berm and then you're going back down. So not only do you have a different angle, but you've also got a different perspective looking down over the garden or looking down over the sculpture. And then one other key feature of this sidewalk that the people in this room will know and not everybody else will, this was part of that gesture to try to get people to understand that there is an entrance over here. Visually, when you pull up to this corner now, you will notice this line of concrete that says there's something over here, and this will connect directly up with the center of that drop-off drive now. So it's subtle, but it's a way to cue the eye that there's something else over there. And then moving around to the front entrance, here comes that walk, and it tells you, it kind of points your attention right at this, and someday we're hopeful that could be a place for a new monumental piece or some sort of visible element out there in the lawn or in the landscape. So reimagining this front area, not really changing a lot of the paving, but really trying to update the landscaping to make it more akin to what happens over here with these lacebark elms, pulling in some of that type of character, as well as what happens in that north garden where there's more shade and more of an intimate feel. And then redoing this central island so that it's more intuitive and we don't have to have the bollards to protect it. So people will know they're driving in a circle, it's natural, they know to do that. So we think that'll be a vast improvement. And then also, this has been called the prairie berm. And that came on very early as a way to really edge the garden and edge the museum from the large open lawn that's on top of the water tanks just to the west, because it just fell off and there was no sense of closure or enclosure on that edge. So this prairie berm is called that because it is. It's a manicured, sculpted berm that's going to be planted with prairie plants and meadow plants, and it'll just have this real diverse landscape on it. But then Derek has also come up with an idea that's pretty cool for lighting it, and we'll show you some images of that, but really creating more of a feature out of it than simply a partition that separates space, and could become, really a pretty cool thing to have at the front entrance of the museum. So just to kind of show you what that transformation looks like, we've got a lot of before and after photos. So there's before, and this can be the new entrance to the sculpture garden. So screening off the mechanical enclosure from the people that are entering from the parking lot, and just providing an initial place to put a sculpture and to sit and wait for a ride, or to just sit and relax. Then the other view from the north, and this is that north garden. So again, that intimate space where you've got several different pathways you could walk on. You can hang out in there. You can look out over what might be going on in the amphitheater. So we think that is probably the favorite space of a number of people on the committee, and I think will be for a lot of people in the future. So looking out from the area upstairs and from the museum cafe, it's not bad. You have the view of the river. We said that was important. But we want to transform that into something we think much more engaging and beautiful from the inside. So here's that. While it's elevated, the grade is ever so slight, but there is a little bit better sight line now to the patio area, and it still maintains this large flat area for tented events and things like that. Still able to hold about 800 people in this space for the large events, and then as I mentioned, they can spill over into the Riverview room as well. And you can sort of see, it's a little dark, but back in the background, those Core 10 partitions starting to show up in these renderings. And again, we're not adding a bunch of trees out here, we're maintaining that view to the river because that's so important. And then looking back into that space from the street, And this is that northeast corner. Again, I mentioned announcing the museum with similar signage to what's out by the front entrance today, and really trying to just take full advantage of that, because it's very beautiful, and we want to extend that around the perimeter, and actually in some cases bring it into the museum. And then that confusing entrance, the Riverview Room, and that view to downtown, even though we've evidently planted a lot of trees over by the river that have hidden that view. But the idea is now you've got, you're actually elevated up here probably 3 or 4 feet above the existing grade, so your perspective out over the river and to downtown is just that much further enhanced. And then you can begin to see the Dreamers Awake peek out of the edge over there. And then this space, and this isn't a dead-on perspective from the before to after, but you get the idea. So that's, again, just very stark, not terribly inviting. And while it's further away, you can get a sense of what this garden pathway can look like, and then how it starts to give you an elevated view out over that sculpture. And then here's an even better view of that, looking back to the east, northeast. So when I mentioned we've added some fill in this area to create this raised plinth and just create an outdoor sitting area. And it doesn't just have to be for kids. It could be a great place for just a string quartet or something like that. And these, I mentioned these stones popping up. These were introduced by Tom, and we were just thrilled to death when he gave us that flexibility to do that. And then dropping in this tree so close to that sculpture, that was a move he suggested. We've also, you can see it here, and you'll see it in even better in a minute, but we've created this landscaped berm. It's part to help direct traffic to the front, but it's also part to mask this space from the street, because I think there's a visual cue people see when they drive up. They see those doors, they see the sculpture, they think that's the front. And this along with the trees, really help to buffer that view of the door until after you've already made your decision. So it's a subtle wayfinding cue that we're using, but then that berm comes back down to grade, so as you're driving by, and this was important to Tom, you still have a view of the larger portion of that sculpture. While you don't see all the stuff on the ground, you at least understand that it's there. And then another view of that farther away from the street. So again, that rather than having the sign farther to the north, the brick one that's there today, we've pulled a sign around here so that it actually does give you a better understanding of which direction to go, and it has the just ever so slight angle on that, similar to the existing sign that helps to direct your attention to the left. And then the rooftop. While that, it wasn't necessarily part of garden, so to speak, it was an opportunity that we saw that seemed pretty simple, that we could do something better. We know we can't use it physically because of conditioning issues with the building, but it could be more attractive even, whether you come up from the outside or whether you just view out onto it. So can we do it, create just more of a roof garden up there and move the Henry Moore piece? That's definitely, going to happen. Move that up there. I believe it was there at one time before. But really just soften that whole brick platform up and make it more inviting and more attractive to look out onto. Because really this is where you're going to get some of the best views of the garden that you can see from up there. So that's what it looks like today. And then, redefining that, putting in, really accenting or accentuating a berm in there, and then landscaping it again with more of these prairie plants and meadow plants. But doing it in a way that, we know there have been issues. We're very, very mindful of that, and we're spending a lot of time with selecting, the right plants, right plant, right place, they say. And then you can see the prairie berm, and what you start to see is these little white dots. There actually probably would be more of those. We don't know the height. Derek is still working on those, but those begin to be those little fireflies, if you will, that happen out in the prairie at night. And then as you transition to nighttime, you can see those start to come alive. And this is one of the things he showed us. We were sort of on board, and then he showed it to us. We're like, okay, that's pretty cool. We got to figure out how to do that. We don't know. We don't know what they're going to do yet. He's an artist. You never know. But his idea, I'll share where he's at right now, is that what he would really like to do is create a community event around that. the vision in his mind, and again, you know, it's an artist, and you bring them along a schedule as best you can. His vision, he's not here, so I can say that, right? No, he's actually good because he's more consultant than artist, but it's incredible working with him. His vision is that each of these is self-contained, solar. We don't have a lot of infrastructure to do these, that they would be small illuminated elements on the top of stainless steel poles. And the idea is that there might be a day at some point when they're ready to be installed. The poles, the shafts, the fronds on the grass, whatever you want to call those, the stems, might be ready to be installed, and we have a community event and we have volunteers come out and they plant the prairie. And so they're engaging the community in this process. And then maybe there's another event that comes up that it's time to light the prairie. And we come back and we attach the fixtures on top of those poles. And then there's a celebration around lighting the prairie. So he's thinking holistically about this, and I think that's what's really great about working with him is he's really going to the end and figuring out how do we make this wonderful, and then we can back it in from there easily once we know what the end story is. So we think that's a pretty cool thing, and excited that there's interest among the committee and some of the donors for seeing that happen. So looking at just some, as I mentioned, not changing everything, but just updating the landscape, adding more trees, making it more consistent with what's over by the parking lot. But also one of the things that we're looking at, and I've got another image of this, is creating a place for people to sit up here so it's not so lifeless. So there is a place to actually spend time at the front of the museum. So it doesn't feel so much like all you're supposed to do is go and get in the museum. And so, you know, creating just a little sitting area here where maybe we've got some movable furniture that could be pulled in the evening, or, you know, maybe we've put fixed furniture, we don't know yet, but just a wide spot in the road, so to speak. So then, you know, just an overall look. This is a little bit dated. The plaza over here hasn't been updated in this model, but it gives you a sense, as it did the very first image of this presentation, of what the whole assembly begins to look like. And it really is quite wonderful. And I think this is one of the best images to show that, again, coming back to that introduction of the meander and the intertwining of the river in the pathways, and the goal of having multiple choices in what part of the garden you want to see and when you want to see it. You know, maybe you take a different route tomorrow than you took yesterday. And then how does that really change at night? You know, because it is a facility that it's a beacon, it can be a beacon. You know, we may not leave the internal lights on all night, but what does the exterior look like? To be a 24-hour, you know, tremendous showpiece and jewel for the city along that riverfront, and especially on those special events when people are down here for Riverfest and things like that, that this reminds them that there is an art museum in Wichita. So the last thing I have, we've actually been working throughout this. We use a lot of 3D modeling in our design process, and we don't do it just at the end as a rendering or as a presentation. But we've been working on a 3D model and video throughout this to share with the committee because it helps them understand the ideas. And so I think we're ready to put a bow on it. So we want to show you that. And then just maybe a couple minutes of where we're going next at the end of that. So I'm going to let somebody up in the booth kind of get it going from here. So again, just that space that opens up to the street, I think, is going to be one of those accidental successes. Now that the earthquake kind of shifted all those stones off center a little bit. That we weren't expecting, but now, Bob, you don't have to do that. It's already done. So coming in from the parking lot, again, that new entrance and screening of the service area and introducing those stone walls where we can. So that this is a pedestrian space now, so we want it to feel like you're the important part of this area. And then going into the garden and this new sculpture that I don't think moves. So, you know, what a place to hang out and have lunch. Hop over from downtown. And then you can see those partitions in the background there. And then we think this, where that tent is a place where you have the pre-function. You could have the bar, you could have information when you have the big events. And then coming in from the northeast corner, you're looking down Pine, see a place for a sculpture there, and then that yucca garden I mentioned, that it's just that little kind of surprised arid garden that happens. So really trying to create some new spaces to celebrate the existing collection. And then heading over into the Riverview room, and you'll see the offset of the stone seats that I mentioned, and how some of them, it wasn't because of the earthquake, but we did talk about that opportunity for maybe something happened and the wall got busted apart. And then, wow, coincidence. But we think this little tiered seating area could really be attractive, you know, for people that may not even come into the garden, just to hang out. And then that view out over the Dreamers Awake Plaza. So then coming in from Stackman. So you kind of have a hidden view of the sculpture and of the front, but then it opens up once you've come around that Museum Boulevard and already kind of have made your decision on where to go. And Derek has some great ideas about how we're going to illuminate that plaza as well. So moving over toward the front of the museum, there's that visual cue as well as pathway. And you can kind of see on the left how it's bermed up. So there's that alternative choice you have that gives you a different vantage point. So, with that, what's next? We are trying to move into moving some dirt. I don't know yet this month. We're hoping for, right, Bob? We're trying. I think it's our fault that we haven't done it yet, but we're trying. You know, our goal is to try to get some dirt moving out there yet before the end of the year. You know, if possible, yet this month. Ultimately, be to a point where sculpture's put back in next spring, and I believe, where's Patricia? September, pull the ribbon off and have a celebration and celebrate all the good work the committee's done and that everyone else that's been involved with this has done. So there will be a lot of work to be done in that amount of time as well. So you will see fences go up, and that's going to be part of the intrigue as well, is people just wondering what's happening and what's going to be next on the inside. So with that, I would say again, thank you from my team and from all of us. It's been a pleasure. This has been a great project, a great team to work on, or a great project to work on. We've met new friends that we're going to have a long time. And with that, and be happy to answer any questions that you all might have, maybe a couple. And how are we doing on time? We got time for a couple, you think? Okay. Yes?
Was any study made about the cost of maintaining all this?
Yeah, we actually, from a landscape standpoint anyway, primarily we talked to Suburban, the company that currently is maintaining the grounds. And we've gotten, we had them look at the plans and develop a maintenance plan and maintenance estimate so that the museum can factor that into budgeting so that we're not going into it blindly.
And Citizen Construction also got some input from 3 different
Right.
places, and we have 2 dedicated sources of landscape funding. So the Wichita Art Museum will be able to afford to take care of this spectacular garden building.
And I would say, just final note on that is, if you peel this thing back, you're really talking about some very basic elements. You're talking about stone, dirt work, some landscaping. A other than that, you're talking about lighting and the sculpture. I mean, there's really not a lot of mechanical parts and pieces to this right now, so that was intentional, because we want this to be successful long-term, maintainable long-term, and it just was the right move. Yes?
I know you didn't overlook this, but you've walked us through the spring and summer vision of this garden. What's the fall and winter vision we're going to see like it is out there now?
Well, if fall is like this year, we can just skip that and go straight into winter. Yeah, exactly. So forget that. No, actually, yeah, it's more a matter of we just didn't have time to render all those different things up. But the beauty of a lot of the meadow plants or prairie plants that we're proposing, and not all meadow and prairie plants, they are your basic perennials in there as well, and the trees, is that the color will transition throughout the year. You're not going to have everything blooming in the spring and then going dark in the summer, so to speak. So you will have a continual transition of color throughout the growing season. And then when the fall comes along, one of the beautiful things about the prairie is the fall. You have that, even though it's a smaller scale here, you'll still have a lot of that same texture and color. And in the winter, part of this is going to be that it looks completely different because you've got the structure of the trees. The lace bark elms that we're proposing at the front are, I mean, the ones you've got out here today by the parking lot, those are attractive. A lot of the trees that we're proposing in certain places are selected for that sort of sculptural quality that they have when the leaves are gone. You know, a lot of the landscape could be left. My guess is from just a sheer maintenance standpoint, some of it will just be chopped low for ease of maintenance throughout the winter. But that's okay, because then the sculpture garden, you see the sculpture from the street, and a lot of those spaces look completely different. It's Wichita, it's winter. You're not going to have a lot of people out there looking closely at all that stuff. So I think then it really makes sense that you can see even more of it from the street. So, you know, I think from that perspective, it really does work year round. But good question, thank you. Anybody else? Oh, one right here. Go ahead.
Any consideration given to water? Wichita's supposedly running out of water.
Yes. Actually, the city, prior to us even starting on this, had already agreed to, the city, not the museum city, had already agreed to install an automatic irrigation system. So now as far as the water supply, I can't speak to that, but I know that the city is already planning to install a fully automatic irrigation system throughout the garden. Really, it's going to be coordinated, but it's separate from the monies or the budget for the museum itself. So like I said, that gave us a lot more flexibility, but at the same time, we don't take that as carte blanche to just go crazy. We've still prioritized hardy plants that do well in hot, dry winds, which, the water is what it is, but you don't have an infinite amount. So we don't want to just be blowing water out 24 hours a day. So that was definitely considered. Yes?
Well, I just want to compliment you on the Artemis kind of plaza area. I think just adding the seating area is brilliant.
Thank you.
I like the swimming team and kind of the way it weaves throughout the property. I kind of question the seating area by the roadway. It looks like it's just kind of looking out onto the roadway. I'm a little concerned about why anybody would sit there. I mean, I know it's close to the river, but you're going to be looking through a roadway, so I kind of wonder about that one.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that. There will be a wall there because of the way we're adjusting the grade to create that elevated lawn space. So instead of having that wall be more of a kind of a deterrent or pushing people away, we took the opportunity to step it back so that it was a little more welcoming, and it just sort of created that seating space. It wasn't the intention to go out and create a seating space, but we were able to take advantage of that, and we think doing something better than just a straight 4 foot high or 4.5 foot tall wall we thought was a good move. And then just, even though it's out by the road, we think that there will be a lot of families that, kind of pass through that space. And so kids like to climb on rocks. They like to walk on walls. And so, again, it's a reason, it's something they remember. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So just kind of piggybacking on that a little bit, I'm just imagining in that particular space too, you might sit on those walls and be looking, yes, across the road, but across the river and maybe towards downtown. So you might have some views there. But one of the things that you showed earlier on in one of your early slides with where you had the dots, and the green dots things you're keeping, and the other dots things you weren't keeping. I noticed in that particular one, out in the river, there was a series of green dots in the river, and it made me wonder, is there a plan, or is there something that's happening on the other side of the road, on the river side over there, perhaps with, I don't know, landscaping, sculpture, that sort of thing? Could be future plan, but are there thoughts on that?
There's nothing associated with this project planned for that. I don't know if the parks or if the city has anything else planned. The focus there was just maintaining that view from the garden to the river, and making sure that we didn't overlook that, but also take advantage of it. You look across now, there's the trail, so you have a lot of people moving by, and then you also have the tennis courts in the far distance on the other side of the river. So we felt like even if nothing is done there, it's really not a bad view, because it's a pretty cleaned up edge to the river right through there. And then, you mentioned the view out to downtown as well. So, we're not proposing to do anything over there as part of this project, no.
So did the green dots that you had placed there represent a particular thing that was going to happen over there?
No, it was when we talked through, what we did is we put those dots up, then we go back and we process that and say, why did you put that dot there? And it was, we don't want to lose sight of the river. We want to keep that view. The river's important. So it was more of or less literal sort of, I want something there. It was more maintain that relationship or strengthen that. Yes?
There's no way now to get from the second floor of the views out to look over this garden, and even better to get down to it. Is there any consideration to the structural part, that part of the building?
There was. We talked quite a bit about that, and part of the reason that we've expanded that lower patio or the patio area a bit is for the opportunity to have cafe seating down there. It might just be food cart or something in the near term, but there was a conversation about long term, there is an opportunity. It was really outside the scope of this project, but certainly there was talk about what could we do to allow people to get a bite and go down there, or to be served down there. And architecturally, certainly it could be done. It's just not a simple task, and part of it was just based on the schedule we're trying to keep here. But no, that's a good point, and we definitely want to leverage that.
I want to add to that. When the committee got together, we did discuss that, and at one point, we talked about an elevator, because now you have to be concerned about ADA regulations. So that was part of that would facilitate people to go from the cafe down to the New Plaza area. And then, again, we could address the terrace, where we want to put more back. That area, again, is for the future. We would like to see a vestibule put there so that we can then use those doors to go in and out of the museum. Right now, we cannot do that because it affects our humidity. Our HVAC is very much affected by those doors. Right now, we cannot use it. So this project right now is the beginning. There's more to come. That's why we're telling you all about it.
I think that's a pretty good ending segue, unless there's another pressing question. I'm not going to top that. Tony? Thank you all.